Hello, my name is David Martinez, and today we're going to talk about adventures and misadventures of traveling as a family. Okay, joining me today is my faithful co-host Neil Cantrall. Thank you for being here
Good to be
again.
here.
And we're joined by our wives, my wife Susanna Barnreuther, and
And I'm here with my wife, Kelsey Cantrall, and we're going to talk a little bit about traveling with kids.
traveling with kids because we have a lot of experience both traveling as when we were kids, but also now that we have kids. And the hope is that we'll inspire people to take that journey, take that trip, hop on that flight, even if you have four kids in our case,
Yeah.
taking those long flights. I remember, growing up, I have a lot of memories of these trips, these road trips that my parents would take. I grew up in Spain, and my parents had a conference. It was every year, but then it turned into every other year. And they would combine this conference in these different countries in Europe with a 1 week or 2 week vacation. So I have these memories of my dad. He built a structure in the van, and the luggage went underneath the van and underneath the structure, and we would sleep on top of the structure. There weren't that many regulations, I suppose. I don't know how safe that is or how
It was
safe
a
it's
diff-
not.
it was a
It
different
was a
time.
different time. So I remember sleeping on these trips from Barcelona through France into Belgium. I remember one of the earlier trips we took, my mom was obsessed with the sound of music. And so we had to go to Austria. I believe it was Salzburg. I want to say, I could be wrong. I was like 10 years old. And we had to visit all of the sites. We had to go to not just the actual sites where they live, the Von Trapp family where they lived, but also where they filmed it. Because there's different houses. The house that they actually lived in is way smaller than that big old white mansion that they
Yeah.
filmed. And I had a lot of fun. We rented bikes because, of course, in the film you had to, yeah.
Did
And
you
so
sing the songs?
we sang the songs that what the do what do you?
Yeah.
Of course we did, yeah. But I had these lovely memories, and it kind of inspired me to travel. It created this kind of wanderlust in me as well as a child. And I think back now that I travel with my own kids, if it was as incredible as I remember it, I envision now my parents, looking back and saying, "Keep your hands to yourself," and if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. I could be wrong. I don't
Well,
know.
it makes you wonder, how stressful, like you said, how stressful was it for your parents? And,
Right.
I think about, because Kelsey and I have three kids of our own, and two of which were born in Peru. So Kelsey had our oldest and our youngest child while in Peru. And so their memories of growing up were outside of the United States. And I think as they get older, they start to ask more questions about, hey, when can we go someplace again? And we said, well, we can go to see the Grand Canyon and something like that. They're like, no, I don't want to go to the US. I want to go someplace
That
different.
doesn't count.
That doesn't count. I'm like, come on, guys. The United States is incredible things to show us. But I think for our family, some of that wanderlust kind of came early on. I know from Kelsey when you were a child. Can you tell us about when you were a young girl down in South America?
Yeah, it was only like 3 years, but we lived in Peru and Bolivia for three and a half years when I was a little like kindergarten age.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys
Um,
were, what, 6 years old?
Yeah,
6
it
years
was,
old?
yeah, it was around that age.
Okay.
I was homeschooled by my mom then, but because of that experience, I remember always wanting to do more. And we went back to the US after that and, did the normal white picket fence type, buy
Yeah.
your house, get your, stable job type thing, or my parents did. But
You
I
were
always,
working at 12 years old. You
Yeah,
did a
yeah.
job and buy a house.
That's
I was
another
building my
story.
fence, yeah. No, but I remember always wanting to do it again. And growing up, in a little town in Oregon after that, it wasn't very normal to be around people that had lived overseas, even if it was for 3 years. But I remember always wanting to do that again. It just kind of ingrained something in your family, I think that's probably the case for your kids and our kids as well. They start out
I would
with
hope,
that.
yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
goal,
that's the
right?
hope,
Yeah, I
that's
think
the goal.
that sense of adventure, right? Like to get to a new place that you don't know and to discover it and not to have like the super known things, but that also like brings the seed in you, right? Like I want more of that. I remember that as a kid too. Like it was nothing to be in the car for 25 hours because my parents are German. I grew up in Spain and we would travel up and down to Germany multiple times a year back when there was no highways or worse roads or whatever. And we would just spend hours in the car and I was knitting and drawing and pestering each other.
Mhm.
Surely not. Surely you
Never.
were kind to each other.
Yeah. It's actually kind of nice to remember how nice the memories sound to us in the sense that now when I have a stressful time with my kids, I'm like, oh, maybe they won't remember that I was yelling at them to be quiet when we travel. But yeah.
So you talk about these trips that you took from Germany to Spain. Did you travel anywhere else?
Yeah,
as a young kid?
We traveled a lot, like I said, but there's one specific travel, big trip that we did about 6 weeks. My parents had this idea or this vision to go and minister to the Sahrawis in Africa. They were like in the border of Morocco. So they decided they wanted to go there, but you're not allowed to be a missionary in Morocco. So they had to kind of pretend this is a family vacation and pretend we were a rich German family going to Morocco. My dad at the time was ministering at the jail, and he was working with this person who was caught smuggling drugs from Germany to Spain. He was a German, but he was in the prison in the south of Spain, in Sevilla. And he had been caught with this giant trailer, I think like 20-foot long trailer, that was now impounded in the jail parking lot. And somehow, I don't know, this is 1986, my dad talked to the police and they let him take this trailer to go to Morocco with his family.
Of course.
We also had a Mercedes that was pulling this trailer. I don't know where that came from. But anyway.
Was it a diesel?
Yes. It was like a big, because it was like a big giant thing. And so
That's
here we
great.
are, my brother maybe 18, 14, I was 10 or 9 even, and then my youngest brother was 7. And we started off, we went there. There was, many adventures. There were many like checkpoints where the Moroccan military was, because it was like this war zone. And they would always ask for wine. They wanted bribes to let us through. We didn't give them wine. I don't know if we had any or not, but we did give them chocolate, and they were okay with that.
That's okay. Yeah.
And I think part of the crazy adventures was like the tires would all explode like at different times
While you're driving?
while driving in the dunes, like stuck in the sand. And because I think because it was like parked in this parking lot for a year or whatever in the hot sun. So the tires were not in best condition. And I remember this one time, this Land Rover came by. I mean, these are not roads. These are like dunes, like little sand roads. And this Spanish ranch guy came by, and he took us all in his Land Rover to his hacienda or to his ranch. And then came back and helped my dad get out the thing or get a new tire. And we ended up at his ranch, and it was the feast that they were commemorating of when Isaac was almost sacrificed by Abraham, although they're Muslim, so they believe it was Ishmael.
Ishmael, yeah.
And I don't think he was a Muslim personally, this ranch owner, but he celebrated this for his workers. And so there was this patio and this goat that was brought, and like the head pulled back and the knife cuts and the blood squirting and the puddle of blood. And I was like, ah.
And you're 9 years old watching all this?
I was 9 years old. My brother's 7. Yeah, it was just
Memories of childhood travel.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about, I kind of back up to what you were saying about the bribing with wine or chocolate and things. And I'm trying to think about how many times our kids have witnessed me try to get through police bribes in different countries while driving around.
Not again, Dad.
So, whether it was Indonesia, whether it was Ecuador, Peru, you'd get pulled over for whatever reason. And the tendency is they tried to get you for something, but they're wanting you to give a bribe of some sort. So the kids are all nervous and worried and just watching Dad try to figure out how to negotiate things, in a Christian way, but also in an, expedite it a little bit, a smart
culturally
way.
appropriate way as well. This is
Exactly.
what you do.
So, I believe that, God gave me the wisdom in all those situations to handle it and get us moving on the road. I won't go into all the details about how that happened, but let's just say at the end of those, the kids were calm, I was calm, and we would move on. But
Well, these are great lessons for kids, because now if they get pulled over in the States, they know how to negotiate and how to bribe.
Yeah, right.
That's a joke.
definitely
Maybe
not.
It's a joke.
And we were always careful to tell them, it's like, this is because we're in someone else's turf. This isn't our own country, so we're
Right.
trying to, act in a way that's appropriate within the country we are. Because for us, this isn't normal, right? And I think our kids always knew that, even though they identified as Americans, but they never really lived in America until about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting transition, yeah.
Yeah, and to grow up in this way, I think to travel, to see that as a young kid, I think it's really exciting and different. Like you said, or as it has been mentioned, you start to recognize how unique and special that is when you start to have friends who maybe don't have a passport or who haven't had this opportunity. As a kid, the memories can be one thing. You mentioned this earlier, right? The memories, so that now when my kids have, or when I'm annoyed at my kids, maybe they're not going to remember this part, but ultimately it's going to hopefully engender in them this wanderlust and this idea of traveling and experiencing other cultures. But that doesn't mean it's not always easy, right?
But yeah, traveling with kids is not easy, but that's something you have to assume and you
Right.
prepare for it. So, you travel differently, right? And especially when you and your husband get separated in the airport and one misses his flight. And you remember that?
That was his fault, not mine.
Of course.
No, actually, I think it was a traffic thing. There was construction. So we got to the airport in Portland super late, way later. We're really, really good about getting there on time, but this time we weren't. He had a different flight and we were supposed to connect in LAX, which is the worst airport of
Yeah.
all time. I don't know if you agree. But
No,
LAX.
Atlanta is
Atlanta,
almost
LAX.
worse. No.
Anyway, we were in so I got on our flight with the three boys and he had to go on a different one, but his flight wouldn't let him on.
I missed my flight.
So I end up at the last second, give me the house keys because I'll see you later. We're going to Lima, and I ended up having to fly through LAX with three kids, no stroller, got lost in the airport, a sick kid, one that had to do this, didn't know. It was just one thing after another. And then we got on the final flight from LA to Lima. Kid throws up on me, have no change of clothing. You have the kid stuck on you. The other one needs your help. One thing after another,
Yep.
after another.
But they don't remember that, right? I wouldn't think.
I don't know if they do. Yeah, why is
No.
that? I guess that's
Well,
good. Maybe
You
it's-
remember that, but the kids are just
course.
like, yeah, mom, I travel with mom. I was fine.
I mean, I absolutely don't remember my mom ever yelling. Like I say to her, you were always so calm. And she's like, no, I wasn't. So yeah, there is hope.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know if my kids would say the same about me. I don't know if it was yelling more.
More being stern, or
Firm
being
speech.
firm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think traveling with kids, that's maybe the first barrier to overcome. Is, are we going to hop on a plane with 4 babies or 3 or 2 or whatever configuration? I know you've had some experience traveling on an airplane with
Yeah.
a number of kids.
We had 4 kids in 5 years, so many small children at once. And David did a lot of study abroad travel, and there was always this question: should I go with him? But it was easier to stay home for a large part and then join him later. So I was like, well, I'm gonna have to fly with 4 children, and one is a baby. I mean, they're all like 4 and under. So yeah, I just kind of said, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be that crazy lady. People are gonna hate me, but hopefully they will never see them again.
It's this many hours.
It's this
I'm
many
just gonna
hours.
grit
I
through
will
it.
survive.
Yeah.
We will get there, and in pieces or however, but we will get there. And the reality is that people really are helpful, and they want to help, and they see you, and maybe they think you're crazy. They probably do, but they're helpful. And I remember I had 2 of my children across the aisle, so I couldn't reach, and they were so young they couldn't even like choose a movie or a cartoon to watch. So there was these 2 girls behind them, and I was like, do you mind? And so they were reaching over and like, putting a movie on the screen, helping them open their trays of food and manage all that. And I was on the other side with the baby and the other baby. And yeah.
How do you do bathroom breaks with that? Because I would imagine you can't just send a 4-year-old, or do you send a 4-year-old?
I don't think I did. I think I carried one and one was asleep, or I was like, could you just keep an eye? Or I don't even know. I mean, I changed dirty diapers on my seat. Yeah, I don't know. Like,
Oh, yeah.
you just do
You just go
whatever.
into
Things you don't want people to
mode.
know that you changed a dirty diaper on an airplane seat.
They might
There
have
was
known.
one story. I wasn't there for this. Obviously, I was doing a study abroad in Spain at the time. But you flew, I think, with our 2 oldest kids. They were a year and 6
like
months.
under 2 years. It was
Under 2
under
years.
2, and one was 6 months. And I had actually got a seat for my 2-year-old, and I had my baby, and I was like, oh, I'm good to go. And just as we were taking off, the flight attendant came and said, no, you can't have 2 babies. You need to hold them. And so I was like, oh, my 2-year-old won't go. So I was like, do you mind? And I just handed the baby to the passenger
To a random
beside me,
stranger?
to a random stranger. And he was
Excuse
like,
me,
okay,
sir.
sure.
Could you hold this
just for
baby?
takeoff and arrival. And yeah, they did. And they probably remember this story as that crazy lady.
Well, you
but
can't say
we-
no
we
to a
made it.
kind-
I know. How do you
needy
say no
mother.
to somebody handing you a
can't.
baby, right? I think that's been my experience too. Is that there's this idea of you're inconveniencing people on a plane, but overwhelmingly people are kind and nice. You always get the 1 or 2 people who are annoyed at you and upset, but they're going to be annoyed and upset at anything.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, people are happy to help and feel for you to a certain extent, right? That's
Yeah.
been my experience anyway. Although the times that I traveled by myself with kids, which was I think 0.
I was gonna say I don't remember.
Yeah, I
that.
think that's the same for me too. I don't
How
know.
does that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think, what I keep coming back to as we have this conversation is, you really don't have to think about getting all your traveling out before you have kids. Granted, it's going to be a little more challenging, like we've said, but I think the value that it's going to provide for your kids as far as lifelong experience, it's going to be totally worth it. And as far as, our own kids who started traveling when they were really little, they always think back to these experiences and how, it shaped the way they think about this, because they think about the world differently. They recognize that people are people all over the world.
Mhm.
And I think it's important for kids to see that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I think as you say, it's hard, it's difficult, it can be more expensive. It is different. I remember when we traveled, we had been married for I think 3 years before we had our first kid, but we had been around the world literally several times. We were living in Taiwan, and so every time you went to Europe or the States or Atlanta, you could choose kind of which direction you went. It was 6 one, half a dozen others. So we kind of chose different configurations, I guess, to say that we'd been around the world, right? But, I remember 10 days in the Philippines and Burma, Hong Kong, Macau, all these trips that we'd taken. Egypt for the weekend. Remember we went to Cairo. And then we were starting to have babies. We had a 1-year-old. You were pregnant, 6 months pregnant with Lucas, right? And we were saying, we're not going to let this impede our travel. We're going to still travel. We're going to
Right.
do this. And so we booked a trip to Guatemala with dear friends, and they had a kid.
A
She
1-year-old as well.
Yeah, 1-year-old. She was, I think, 6 days older than Alba or something. So very similar age. And we're going to keep traveling.
Yeah.
But very quickly realized that it was going to be different.
It's
We're going to
different.
book the Airbnb way in advance. We're going to be a little bit more stable. We stayed in Antigua for, I think, 10 days in this Airbnb. The outings were conditioned by naps,
Nap time,
right? Or
definitely.
feeding times, or
Is there shade?
yeah, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
So it's gonna be different. Still exciting. Definitely different though. It
Yeah.
wasn't as spontaneous. I remember when we went to the Philippines, we showed up and didn't have a place to stay. Remember that we didn't have a hotel or anything. Or like, let's just see what happens. And there were no hotels. We ended up sleeping in a German dude's like back porch or something, right?
Some
But
benches.
that would never happen with a kid. You could never
Right.
just show up and say, let's
No.
see what happens, because this 1-year-old needs.
I mean, you
have-
could.
You could, I suppose, right?
Well, I always say, and Kelsey and I say this, that kids are a lot more resilient than we are as adults.
Yeah.
Yes.
So kids can handle so many different things that we want to make sure they don't have to handle. But it ends up being us, the adults, being like, oh no, this just would be unacceptable. And the kids are like, oh, I don't know. Like we were in Bali sleeping at this random Airbnb because the one we were at before was just really gross and didn't work out. Well, this next one was equally as gross.
Even worse.
Yeah, you want to tell that whole
Well, it
story?
was during the COVID time, so a lot of the Airbnbs hadn't been used for months, and they
Months.
hadn't cleaned them,
Oh.
and everything was kind of, the maintenance wasn't, the ACs weren't working, and it's a very hot area. And so we went to the second one after the first one was gross, and the second one was even grosser. And our oldest had AC like dripping on his head
wow.
and ants crawling around his head while he was sleeping.
Well, no, that was Ezra and Simon,
Oh, that was
our
Ezra.
youngest two. They had on their bed, the AC was dripping onto their pillow. They didn't even know it. They're just sleeping. Ants crawling around on their bed. And they wake up and they're like, is there any cereal? I'm like, oh my goodness, you guys, look at your bed. And they're like, oh yeah, that's not good. They just kind of get up and
Let's go
roll
swim.
through it. And as parents, we're just like, oh, that's terrible. This is horrifying. We need to find. But the kids were just rolling with it.
Yeah,
And they were like, oh, can we go swimming? And it was a really telling moment that kids are quite resilient.
Yeah, for sure. And even the way you travel, right? The car seats or the different
yeah.
kind of
The
configurations.
fold-up
and
beds we always have to take.
Yeah, where can you sleep? What do you need in order to sleep? In your trip to Morocco, you had a trailer, so did you sleep in the back of this trailer? Or what?
Well, yeah, I think, we slept in the back of the trailer. I remember actually traveling. I think you're not supposed to do this, right? Nowadays, but I remember driving and my brother was sleeping on the bed and he was just like going up like a couple feet every bump because
Unsecured sleeping.
unsecured, absolutely unsecured. But yeah, we would sleep, and even on our trips to Germany, like you said, the little platform in the back, like this much space between the suitcases and the level, and my parents would just sleep on the side of the road, and we would sleep in the car. in the highway in France somewhere. Like,
Sleeping on the sideway, on the
Yeah.
side of
I
the
don't
highway.
know.
That sounds.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know that you could do that nowadays, but back then we did it, and it
Yeah.
was
It's
fine.
fine.
Fine, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we had the 2 bench seats in the back of our Land Cruiser Troopy in Peru, and our kids would just bring pillows and blankets, and they would just, one would stretch out on one long bench, one would stretch out
No
on the other,
seatbelts.
and then one would stretch out on the floor, and you just sleep, and we'd be barreling down the Panamericana, just kind of figuring out, where to go. And I remember a time we were driving, and all of a sudden, the fuel or something happened, and the car just stopped, and the kids woke up, and they're like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I don't know. The truck just turned off." And then I remember that we have 2 tanks in our truck, so I pressed the rear tank button and kept starting. Sure enough, we just ran out of gas in the one tank. Kids are like, "Okay, you can go back to sleep now."
But it was so hard for them when we moved back to the U.S. or when we travel. We're like, you have to be in a booster seat. You have to be in a
And you
car
have
seat.
to wear
You have to.
seatbelts.
You can't be in the front seat. There's so many rules
Safety
here.
is a nuisance, isn't it?
Yeah, they're
I mean,
like,
if you could
It's
just
a
let
bit of a nuisance. We had friends from Indonesia visit us this last summer, and they wanted to take everyone to go see a movie or something, and they asked, "Do all the kids really have to be in seatbelts, or can a couple of them just be in between?" We're like, "Yeah, they all have to be seatbelts."
Well, there were 7 kids in a little SUV. Right?
Yeah, and there weren't
That's
enough
fine,
seatbelts,
right?
and we're like, "No, they all actually have to be buckled
Yeah.
in." I was like, "I know it's kind of frustrating, but
Well, when we were in Indonesia, our youngest he was 7. He always sit in the front seat with his head out like a dog in a window, just kind of with his hair flapping.
he was like 5 and 6."
Yeah, and can't do that here. Why
He
can't I
misses
sit in the
that.
front seat?
Yeah, those
That'll be a
times will
while.
never come back. Because I do look back fondly, but I do wonder how comfortable was it really? I don't remember being uncomfortable, but I also again don't remember bickering or fighting with my siblings. I'm sure there was some bickering and fighting. But the other thing too is there's a lot of talk about safety. What are you going to do if something happens? I remember I took a trip when I think it was 11 or 12. It wasn't with my family. A different family invited me. I was friends with the oldest son, so he had a younger sister and a younger brother. Ages, I'm going to say 12, 9, and 5 or 6 or something. And we went from a road trip from Spain up to England, and my friend I started having some stomach pain. It turned out he had appendicitis.
Oh
Mm-hmm.
no.
So it was really dangerous. But he's in the back of the van, writhing in pain
Wow.
and hurting, and we're in the front trying to figure out
Oh,
how to
no.
get to. If the father was, I think he was British, so if we could get to England, they could be seen. And sure enough, we got to the hospital. But that whole trip, as horrible as it was in terms of the pain, and it was also an adventure.
Yeah.
We ended up camping out somewhere close or near the hospital. But that's the other thing too, is often people are maybe less likely to take these adventures. I can't imagine your parents thinking, what do we do if one of the kids gets sick? What are we going to do in the middle of the desert somewhere?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if they probably had those thoughts, but it's I think you deal with the things, and it's not like people don't get sick there either. And
Right.
Yeah.
like I remember when our daughter almost cut off her finger
In Spain, yeah.
like the door crashed on and the finger was like hanging, and
Yeah.
we just like went to this place and they sewed it up and they didn't charge us any money, and we didn't have insurance. Like we thought, like, do we need insurance for Spain? And it's like people get sick and people
Yeah.
get taken care of everywhere in a different way maybe, but
Yeah, often there's this idea of a hospital in a foreign country the treatment's going to be way worse, and when in reality they
it
have
really wasn't.
really clean clinics, professional workers, and this was our experience, and it's been our experience almost everywhere.
Yeah.
In Taiwan as well,
Yeah.
the hospitals and the doctors, and so yeah,
Yeah, our experiences and overseas with clinics and hospitals as well with kids has been fantastic. I mean, we had kids. One of our kids broke both of his arms at
Oh.
recess in Lima, and then one of ours had to get stitches in his forehead, and then Kelsey birthed 2 of them in Lima. And you want to tell about that experience?
No, it
briefly?
was good experiences for all of those. Double broken arm. You think everyone assumes in a developing country that it's going to be this
Mm.
traumatizing thing,
right,
but it
dirty,
Yeah.
tools and
exactly,
stuff.
or doctors that don't know what they're doing. or-
Right.
But it was great. They took really good care of him and treated him really well, and
Yeah,
it was
fantastic
very
experience.
That's great to
affordable.
hear, because
Yeah.
I tell people all the time when they travel, because I hear this so many, and I always come back to the same kind of response. So it's great to be confirmed in my suspicions. I haven't been to all of the countries in the world, but my experience overwhelmingly is at the hospital, and the doctors and the care is going to be phenomenal. In some cases, less expensive and more professional than in the U.S.
It was
if I can say.
very
Yeah.
affordable.
Yeah, and I would say, the deeper you get into some of these countries, the care may vary a bit.
Sure.
But I know when you're in those, capital
Yeah.
cities
Sure,
or
sure.
larger cities.
Yeah,
you're
this
gonna-
isn't to say everywhere and,
Right.
and all of the time, but there is this impression, this
Yeah,
idea that
no,
the
it's
U.S.
true.
has the best, and anytime you escape from this,
Yeah.
you're in danger. Be careful where you go.
Yeah.
But the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is the cost. Here's the other thing people talk about. I can't travel. We have 4 kids. It's expensive. How do you navigate traveling with children when it's expensive enough to go as a single or 2 people, and now you have 4 kids, or in our case 4 kids. I don't know, how many kids do you have?
We have 3.
3 kids. Yeah. So how do you handle the finances?
Well, we always made sure that we had easy bedding options for our kids wherever we went, because most hotels, I think, in a lot of countries aren't as bent as they are here on making sure you have only a certain amount of people in a room or in a house. So we always had this little baby Bjorn travel bed that we took with us everywhere. In fact, it was lost at an airport for like months, and we finally recovered it. It was amazing. But we took that thing everywhere, and you just open it up, boom, your kid sleeps, and tarantulas can't get in it, even though they try. So we always try to find places that are large enough for us to sleep and know that our kids could either, pack in with us.
A closet.
Yeah. I mean, we did the closet thing where kids slept in the closet. And as far as food goes, I mean, do you have any hacks for food when we travel?
No, I think kids don't, well, maybe it's just our kids. They don't eat too much, at least when they're younger.
Right,
and it's
right.
not that, I mean, at least the countries that we've been to, the food is relatively inexpensive anyway.
It
Yeah.
can be inexpensive.
So that part wasn't a concern. You just, I mean, with little kids too, you don't go to fancy restaurants.
right.
And you
It's
don't
too
go to places
stressful.
like McDonald's or Burger King. You find the chicken place on the corner where everyone's eating, and it's cheap, and
Yeah, and in some
gonna be
cases,
really
even
good.
supermarkets, you're going to buy a loaf of bread and a couple, to make a
some
sandwich.
cheese.
Yeah.
Although the one time we went to McDonald's in Arica, Chile, we were doing a border hop for our passports, right? We had to leave
For
the
our
country
visa,
for our
yeah.
visa. And there was, those giant play places that would probably be against the law here because it's not very safe, 2 or 3 stories tall.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we were only there, we'd only been in Peru for a few months at that point. So we were just kind of new.
This was our
And-
second time in Peru.
Yeah.
though.
So Ezra, our youngest, or at that time, he was our youngest. He was probably like 3, maybe 4. We went into the play place. He was going,
was
it
like-
was crazy
he was
busy,
3.
kids everywhere, and we're like, that's not our idea of fun, but we were trying to be the cool parents, letting our kids
Fun
do something.
parents,
So stressful, so much noise. At the bottom, kind of like, hey, go have fun, watching them crawl, through all these gross, not great smelling
And then
places.
what
and
do
then
your eyes behold?
Ezra is at the top, has a soft serve ice cream that he did not have. Like we did not buy that for
He
him.
found it.
He found
Oh,
it
my
upside down in the play place. He's like, Mom,
And he's
look."
up there licking it.
I remember it was like slow motion, like, no. And of course, he just starts licking it, and I end up having to crawl up the tube to get him
Yeah.
down. Oh,
Super mom had
anyway.
to brave the tube, remove the ice cream
and also
cone.
cruel mom. How
I know,
how
take
could
that
you
from him.
take an ice cream away?
Tears
I
from
think
and
he
him?
ate most of it by the time I
Yeah.
got up there. So
Yeah, food I think is one of those things you have to navigate. But I think the cost itself, I think it's less expensive than people think. Often, you said, depending on where you go. We went to Europe a couple of years ago. I don't remember when now. With friends of ours, and they have 3 kids, and it was a trip through. It was a total of 10 days with them, right? 10 or 12 days. It was in France, in southern France. And we ended up doing a combination of things where we tried to find the cheaper restaurants, but also we bought things at a supermarket.
Yeah, we
But,
cooked.
Just the memories that
Airbnbs.
they come. It was really hot. I mean, we're trying to do like a combination of touristy things. Let's see the museum, the castles, and those
It was
kinds
like
of things.
110
110 degrees.
And then we ended up just trying to
7
find
children.
swimming holes. It's like, where can we find a
Yes.
river to jump into,
oh yeah,
or
pools.
a lake,
You
or
need
a
to find
pool?
water for kids
Yes.
whenever you travel. Definitely.
But those memories, I think, are ingrained in their minds now. And they talk about, especially going with their friends, I think is another thing to consider. There's some bickering, some fighting, but there's also, some pranks that are pulled on each other, right?
Yeah, and now, and like if we have to travel by air, like we went to visit my mom who lives in Indiana right now, and my kids were asking, well, how long is the flight? Because it was a direct flight from Portland we flew into O'Hare, Chicago. And we're like, oh, it's about 4 hours. They're like, 4 hours?
That's so
That's
short."
nothing.
I can't watch 2 movies.
Yeah,
Like, my kids
that's-
are very excited about the
that's
movies
nothing.
nowadays.
Oh yeah.
And so it was kind of refreshing to hear that. Because it's like, yeah, it's not 11. It's not 9. It's It's only 4. So
Yeah, movies screens have made it a lot
Actually,
easier.
yes,
Oh,
and
man.
actually traveling with kids now that they're a little older. My youngest is 8. When we went 2 summers ago, it was so fun
It was
Yeah.
easy.
because it was easy. Like they
Yeah.
all walk, they
Yeah.
all carry their backpack, and they can like actually we made them like look for the gate and figure out where we
Yep.
need to go. And they were excited. They were excited about seeing the airplanes. It wasn't this days of like keep them alive
Oh,
and then obviously they're watching TV and movies and they love the food and yeah, it was actually really easy. And I was like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah, but don't you think the screens also takes away from some of the, we talk about, I know you mentioned on this trip to Morocco, there was some sibling ways of entertaining each other, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we had my youngest brother was 7 at the time, and we were stuck in this trailer
With
in
no
the middle of
screens
the
and no
desert.
anything.
Absolutely no screens. And so, yeah, I remember my older brothers made him like run to go see that tree over there. It's like 100 feet away. But every 8 steps, you need to say chorizo, which is like a Spanish sausage. So they like gave him these tasks, and he would run 8 steps and chorizo, and they were like louder and chorizo, and he was like yelling and running. So yes, we definitely came up with ways to entertain each other, and the time passed. My brothers made me believe I was 9 at the time, and they were my older brothers. So they told me about this really cool thing that we could take to the desert, which was powdered water. And you just had to take like a little sack of powdered water. It was super, super good because you didn't have to like pack all the stuff. And then you just added a little water and you had water. And I was like, wow, that was so cool.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
See,
obviously.
now we're
pulling your
missing out
leg
on
at
that
all,
because now
yeah.
we have screens and we just watch movies and we can't make fun of each other or try to trick each other.
well, we had when we were visiting this hotel in Jakarta, our middle schooler who was probably in 6th grade then, he thought this hotel was really special and fantastic because it had like cable channels and he could watch actual channels. And he's like, "What are all these things that are telling me to buy things?" I'm like, "Those are called commercials." It's like, whoa. So we went back to that same hotel because we had something to do. And he's like, "Dad, do you think we could stay at that hotel that has cord?" I'm like, "Cord?" I'm like, "Do you mean cable?" He's like, "Yeah, cable." So we consistently,
cord now.
we don't have cable
Cord.
at our house. We never have, but we refer to that time as, we refer to the hotel as the hotel with cord because he had no idea what it was. He thought it was pretty fascinating. Watch TV on cord.
Commercials.
Yeah, just channels. Flick through channels.
It's just great. I think it's it is a different kind of travel for sure. You mentioned you don't have to wait or you don't have to do all your traveling before kids. And you certainly don't have to say, "Oh, I have kids, my traveling is over,
No.
it's done." It is going to look different for sure. I do encourage people to travel, to study abroad as a student, of course, to take those trips and so forth. But also, when you travel, there's a joy to travel to expand your own horizons and so forth, and your perspective for yourself. But also, you're giving your kids a gift. I think that's what we all kind of agree
100%.
with that. You know, this is great to have our kids experience these countries. I remember in France, and I remember our kids just making friends and playing on the beach, and my kid's speaking Spanish and this kid's speaking French, and there's this kind of like they're going to try to figure this out. And it's amazing how quickly they can figure out how to communicate with each
Yep.
other. So language shouldn't be a barrier either, you know,
Right.
or in Spain, even with these third spaces, these plazas that they can go to and engage with other kids. My son playing soccer on the street with these kids. It's just great memories that they're going to take with them forever.
Yeah, and I would say as families too, it creates a bond
Yeah.
that is unique
Right.
to what a lot of families can have because you've been through a lot of different things, maybe some tough, stressful times. You've gone through a lot of challenges as far as getting to these really cool places that you really want to see, and you have that really unique bond.
Yeah.
And I know our family has that for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, should we spin the globe? Let's spin the globe.
Let's
The way this
spin it.
works is you put your finger somewhere. I'm going to spin it, and it's going to stop.
Okay.
And then wherever it stops, let's see if we've been there and see what happens. This is the
Am I-
stressful.
am I
You're
point-
gonna
You're
point.
the-
Do you
You're
want to
gonna
hold
point.
it so it doesn't
Hold the
fly?
base.
Yeah, I'll hold it. All right.
I won't look.
Are you ready?
Yep. Oh,
We landed in
it's like
It was the British
looks like
Isles.
British Isles. All right. Should we talk about England or Ireland or Northern Ireland?
I was there. So it was in high school, but I don't really have a ton of memories. It was kind of one of those things. Yeah, I look at pictures like that was an interesting experience. It was like 2 weeks, I think. We went to England. I was doing track competitions, and we went to Liverpool and London. We saw all the cool spots, of course, but we also had track practice and
Like track and field.
meets.
Oh, that's
Track and field,
great.
yeah. But that was my first time in Europe. And yeah, that was the first time I had traveled internationally since we had lived overseas when I was little.
Oh,
So
nice.
How old were you?
Sophomore, junior year in high school, I think.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think playing sports in a foreign country. I played soccer in Lithuania, and same thing. There's just a different way of engaging with the culture. England, I mentioned earlier, was one of the first trips I took away from my parents. So I went with friends of mine, and again landed in England. Spent a couple weeks there. It was fantastic. It was very independent. I felt very grown up, I suppose, right? Because I'm away from my parents and I'm having to figure things out. My friends' parents were there as well, but it's not the same, right? So yeah, it was a great adventure. Anything else? You haven't been to England. We talked
not
about this.
been to
For our
England.
first
I went
anniversary.
to England as a baby.
I suggested London for our first anniversary, and
Wow.
we landed on, where did we go? We didn't go to London. We went to
Morocco.
Morocco. That's right.
Casablanca. no?
Casablanca.
Wow. I went to England when I was in high school on an advanced placement trip. We went to England, France, and Spain.
Yeah. Okay.
So got a chance to go to London and see all the sights and, take all the goofy pictures as you do when you're a high schooler and you buy the plastic bobby hats and you
And you ride the buses. Right?
yeah,
That's right.
and you
Yeah.
take, photos in the telephone booths and then we went to Barcelona and then we went to Paris. So
Nice.
it was a fantastic trip.
Yeah, and then if we're gonna cross over to Ireland, that was a trip I took right around college, towards the end of college. It was me and like 8 buddies. We rented a van and just traveled around Ireland for 10 days. I
That's
think it
the
was.
dream.
Yeah, it was
Awesome.
amazing. It was crazy. It was
I've never
awesome.
been to Ireland, but
Yeah,
we
it's
both
on our
really
list.
want to go Ireland and
Oh, it's
Scotland.
Yeah, me
beautiful.
too.
I remember we were driving because if you have a van, you can go to these random places, right? And we got lost somewhere, middle of nowhere, and we stopped and asked. I think he was a shepherd. I don't know because there were a bunch of sheep around, and he was the only person there. And so we asked him how to get. We talked for a little bit, and then said, "Hey, how do we get to this place?" And he kind of told us, and we said, "Okay, thank you." And he goes, "Are you in a hurry?" And we're like, "No." And he goes, "Oh, okay." And then we just kind of looked at each other for a second, and my buddy was finally like, "So, how's it going?" And so we ended up talking to this random guy for, I think it was like 20 or 30 minutes, but all because, we asked him for directions. We were on our way, but he's like,
That's
"Hey,
cool.
let's hang out and chat
That's
for a little
awesome.
bit." I love that memory of Ireland. Right?
That's great.
Take your time, go travel slowly and talk to people because they want to have conversations as well. So
Wow.
well, thank you so much. I hope that we've given our listeners some inspiration to travel before you have kids, travel when you have kids. Hopefully if you're really young listening to this, maybe nag your parents about taking you on a trip. Maybe that's a way to do it.
Yes.
I
And
would
as
say
always,
so.
you should travel, you should see the world, you should meet people, and you should be safe with your kids most of the time.
Try to.
Most of the time.
This video podcast is a production of George Fox Digital. To find more material like this, you can subscribe to George Fox Talks on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Our team really appreciates your feedback in the form of likes, comments, and reviews, and we'd really love to hear what you think. To sign up for our weekly email list and to keep up to date with the latest episodes and publications, you can check us out on the web at georgefox.edu/talks. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.